Hi everyone. This video is your introduction to the social psychology in the news assignment for PSY 235 social psychology. As I mentioned in the D2L module describing the project and giving you access to the documents associated with it, I noted that I'm routinely caught by stories in the news that make me kind of either actually or not scratch my head and say, why do people do things like that? Or sometimes over dinner, I'm talking with my husband and we talk about some event in the news, and we're sharing that moment of why did they do that. And I'm prompted then to say, oh, it's connected to this idea within social psychology. So I decided to put that to the test and have designed the Social Psychology in the News project to give you the chance to apply concepts that you're learning in this class to actual examples of human social behavior that show up in news events around the world. And as we explore in this video, you'll have opportunities to think about many different kinds of stories, everything from the tragic events of the day to hilarious, bizarre examples of things people do. Now, the purpose of the assignment is to identify a story. That's the first step. Identify a story in the news describing some interesting sample of behavior. The kind of behavior that makes you go, why did that person do that? Or why did those people react the way that they did? Or why did that particular interaction happen as it did and as it was described in a news story? Then I want you to apply concepts that you've learned in this class to help you explain, or at least partially explain, what you've seen in terms of the behaviors that are depicted in the story. And then to do some analysis, explain how your application of those social psychology principles or concepts or theories actually do help you to understand the behaviors that you read about or heard about in the stories. Because the whole point of this assignment is for you to take, say, whatever sample of behavior you see, and instead of being perplexed and confused by it, you can actually take what social psychologists have learned through their research and have those behaviors make more sense. So whether you're talking about a bizarre, weird news story, and you can actually search Google for weird news, and you'll find lots of fun stories, or just the day's events of conflicts between people in stores about mask wearing. You can use social psychology principles and concepts and theories to help make sense of those events. Now, the example that I gave you on the D2L module was about something that I found somewhat amusing. Back in July, there was a story posted by the Associated Press describing fantasy international flights. So COVID had been going on for a few months, and in Taiwan, just like in many other places around the world, international flights were just not happening, and they're still very limited. Now, an enterprising group within Taiwan decided we're going to have a lottery, basically, where people can win the chance to have a fantasy international not flight. Meaning they went through the whole process of ticketing, of going to the airport, of going through security, of going through these extra health checks, like having their temperature taken and reporting on potential symptoms, going through checking, luggage and all of that, and then they would get on the plane, have a 15-minute experience on a downed plane that wasn't in service, and then they would get back off again. So it was I found the story amusing. Like, why would people pay an entry fee for a chance to win a fake airline flight when, I don't know about you, but I find flying to be just a series of uh, annoyances culminating in finally landing in an airport that you don't want to be in and going through another series of annoyances. So I can't imagine wanting to do that voluntarily, uh, and being super excited about it too. So how does social psychology help us understand why people, um, granted during a pandemic when we're all kind of isolated and we're missing the ability to travel, why would people want to participate in this lottery? Well, there is a certain allure to lotteries, and social psychologists have investigated why we find things that are hard to win so attractive. In part, it's their rarity, it's the mystery of winning that people find really attractive. Another part of it, and this isn't a formal social psychology concept, at least not in name at this point, we do tend to have this FOMO kind of experience of we worry that if we don't get in on something that is being hyped in the news, that we'll miss out. And that will be seen as, the person who just wasn't paying attention and missed out on the big thing. Um, Another more clear example of a social psychology principle that's in play here is something called post-decision dissonance reduction. So people have paid money to enter into this contest to win a flight. After you win and then you go through the process and people ask how it was, you would look pretty silly if you say, wow, I went through all of this to sit on a crowded plane for 15 minutes. It seriously wasn't worth it. But since there are people taking pictures and people are asking you how it was, the tendency for people to answer in the positive is really explained by dissonance theory. Basically, if you put your effort and time into something and it turns out not to be worth it, you feel silly, you feel ridiculous, you feel not smart for doing that. So post-decision dissonance in this case is a useful concept for helping to explain why people would enter into this lottery to participate in a fake flight. There are a variety of other concepts that we could apply here as well, including persuasion concepts and so on. Now here's another example that I looked up and found yesterday, and I believe I was on Google and I typed in Weird News 2020 and you'll find when you do that a lot of the bigger news sites will have some tab on their web pages for odd news or odd stories or weird news, thankfully, because I go for the weird. So here's another story that I found. As I said earlier, I'm an NPR junkie. NPR has a show called Planet Money that involves both podcasts and other kinds of posts. There was a story on Planet Money by Greg Rosowski about, and this was in August, where he was talking about these secret gyms that were operating at a time before states had more commonly allowed gyms to open under special circumstances and with special rules. So this was at a time when most states had lockdowns and gyms were not to be operating because they were considered to be unsafe due to COVID. So you could ask the question, why would gym owners take the risks of defying the order to be closed? And why would people, knowing that the gyms are supposed to be closed by order, why would they go to a gym that they know should be closed? there are a lot of concepts that we could apply here. One of them is the concept of reactance, which is based on reactance theory. Basically, when people feel that something that they have no control over is being imposed upon them in such a way that it really kind of yanks at that desire we have to feel like we have the freedom of choice, to feel like you telling me that I can't do whatever it is that I want to do is actually an existential threat. So for many people, a lot of the COVID lockdowns really feel like that us being told we can't go where we want to go, that we have to wear an article of clothing that we don't want to wear, i.e. a mask, that we can't go to our favorite restaurants and bars and behave the way we've always played, or behave the way we've always done. It can, in many people, spur this emotional experience of reactance, and then that reactance prompts people to behave against whatever the demand is on their behavior. We can also use the concept of cognitive dissonance. When gym owners kind of on the down low are asked, why are you leaving your door open? So we're not open. Well, there are people here, but we're not really open. And some of those responses really kind of take the form of dissonance reduction. We're not officially open. We're not taking money from people, but they're here working out, of their own free will. They've chosen to come here. So it becomes less about you not locking the door and more about, well, these are people and they freely chose to take the risks of being in the gym. Similarly, why would people go to a gym even when there are health warnings that things like exercise are particularly dangerous in terms of COVID transmission? Well, asking gym goers who were violating the lockdown orders and going to work out in groups would often use dissonance reduction techniques in their explanations, such that they would say things like, well, I'm very safe, I wash my hands, I'm very clean, I trust these people. These are people who are not doing dangerous things. They're not first responders after all, and they're not old. So frequently people would give a range of justifications that very much fit within cognitive dissonance theory and post-decision dissonance reduction. You can also see belief perseverance when asked, how big do you think the risks really are of going to a gym and working out and sweating and breathing hard and things like that. And what people would often report in their rationalization of continuing to go to the gym was very consistent with the concept of belief perseverance. So they'd formed a belief that their healthy lifestyles would offset any risks that they were taking, or they believed that the people that surrounded them were actually kind of their safe bubble and weren't engaging in risky behaviors. So there are lots of social psychology concepts that I could use to help me understand the behavior of the gym owners and the behaviors of the people who went to these quote-unquote underground secret gyms that remained open despite lockdown orders in their areas. Now, what you're going to be producing for me for assessment is an essay. Since this is a new assignment, I haven't exactly worked out exactly how long it's going to be, but I've given you some parameters to work with. I want a one paragraph, and just so we're all clear, one sentence, two sentences, while technically a paragraph is not a paragraph. I want several sentences. Give me a good chunk of language in a paragraph that introduces your argument that you're going to make, given a broad description of the type of human behavior that you're going to be discussing, and it should communicate to me, the reader, what kind of argument you're going to make. I then want a one paragraph, again, not a sentence, not two sentences, but several sentences in a paragraph that summarizes the news story that you chose. Now you do need to do proper citations and have a reference for your news story. Then I want you to give me an explanation of how 3 distinct social psychology concepts are related to your news story. So I want one paragraph for each concept. Now the only source that you need is your textbook. So you're going to use citations and references from your textbook. So you're going to have 3 paragraphs here, one for each concept that you're outlining. Sorry, my presentation, I forgot a parentheses. Hate that. And then finally, you're going to have a 1 paragraph conclusion. So 1 paragraph introduction, 1 paragraph summary of the news story, 3 paragraphs for your concepts, and 1 paragraph conclusion. What I'm going to evaluate you on, I'm going to evaluate the introduction and the theme. So that would be an evaluation of the content of your first paragraph. And I'm going to wrap around and evaluate also your conclusion. Second, the effectiveness of your use of the social psychology concepts. And also I will be assessing your writing. And that includes your use of proper citations in text and your reference page, which should include the reference for your article, the news article that you found, and your reference for your textbook, which you can find that reference properly formatted in your syllabus. The technical requirements, your essay needs to be in a Word document. I know some of you are more comfortable working with, say, Google Docs or something like that, but Google Docs is notoriously bad at maintaining formatting when you've uploaded a document through D2L. Don't ask me why, I have no idea. You have access to Office 365 as a student here. You've already paid through it through your tuition and fees. So you need to use Microsoft Word for your paper. If you turn in a paper through the Dropbox that is in PDF format, I have to convert it, and I will note that the formatting does not always persist when it's converted. When I give feedback on essays, on written work, I provide the feedback in the Word document so that you can see exactly what I'm evaluating, and then I send you my edited copy back such that you have the opportunity to do revision work. So I want your essay in a Word document. It must be double-spaced. You must use a 12-point font. Don't try and create extra spaces between paragraphs such that your essay looks longer than it is, or drive your font up to 14 to make it look longer than it is. I've been teaching for 28 years. I kind of understand those tricks. Same goes with margins. Don't drive your margins up to 1.5 inches to make your essay look like it might be longer than it is, because I've been around that block before. You must have a reference page, and it has to be in appropriate APA style. There are APA resources that are provided for you on D2L. The textbook, as I just mentioned before, the appropriately formatted reference is in your syllabus. You will need to format your own reference for your news story. When you're citing those references, so anytime you paraphrase, anytime you quote, you must properly cite those sources that you have used that are noted on your reference page. Speaking of references, here are the 2 that I used in this presentation. Now, the only formatting error here, PowerPoint does not allow you to do a hanging indent. So properly formatted, these would have have a hanging indent for both of them. One thing you might notice, if you're familiar with APA style, web page references used to require you to have the words retrieved from and then give a date. The APA, in its most recent edition, has removed that requirement. So in my case, I have one reference here by the Associated Press. There was no identified person who was the author of the article. So you use the organization instead. You give the date, you give the title. Titles in this case are in italics, and they're in what's called sentence case, meaning that the first word is capitalized. The remaining words, unless they are proper nouns, are in lowercase. My second reference was written by Brzezowski. You give the first initial of the first name, the date, and again the title. Notice that it is in sentence case and italicized, and the full web address. Do note with web addresses, you do not put a period after them, because that makes it so that those web addresses are no longer live. So you have to be aware of that. So that is the end of my presentation on the social psychology in the news assignment.